must say it's been a pleasure hosting all of you, not just at this conference, but actually in the course of this year, providing a set of spaces in the dialogues to really get to know each of you, to get to know your movements, to get to know a bit about where you stand on the big challenge of our time, and also to learn from you. So we believe as the COPAC team that one of the things we've succeeded in doing in this process is building a collective intellectual. And that's very, very important. And the collective intellectual means that we have worked intergenerationally. We don't have to be looking for some kind of format for that to work. We made it work here, and we can make it work as we go forward and build on this. But it also means that we brought together different bodies of ideas, knowledge, etc. into this process. And that means that everybody has been contributing to how we think about these questions. And for that and for the realization of that, again, we are very grateful to you for your contributions. I must also add that and underline that this 10-year window is very, very critical. And you're going to find me boring and cliched, but it has to be said again. The clock is ticking, and what we do now is going to make the difference going forward. Okay? And so, we haven't tabled a manifesto. I want to disabuse us of that perception and understanding of the Charter. A manifesto actually is a set of proposed policies that a party puts to an electorate, and then they get voted based on those propositions. Okay? And then they promise to go into government and implement those policies. The Charter is not that. It's not a manifesto. The Charter actually deals with something much more complicated. And we did our research when we looked at this. We looked at charters in the history of this country, and we looked at charters internationally. And we are really trying to develop a response to the climate crisis and the challenges it poses to the breakdown of our biophysical commons. Which also means that we have to change and restructure everything in our societies if we want to survive. So it's a document that deals with all of this complexity. And it does it in a way that affirms what is very, very important in charter politics. It sets out a vision, it sets out a set of principles, and it sets out a set of practices. And we have put something together that is more comprehensive than most charters together. So it is path-breaking in that respect. I must also add that I think this journey, and particularly this conference, has been path-breaking also because we've taken the first crucial steps towards intensifying the climate justice struggle in South Africa. And that's very, very important. So it wasn't just a once-off event politics that we've imported from wherever. It's clear that what we have been talking about here today has been about giving this focus, giving this momentum, and building. We've also made the breakthrough around trying to conceptualize and clarify what a climate justice movement would be all about in South Africa. That is historic. That is signal, if you like. Now, when it comes to the collective knowledge that we produce together, we are going to revisit everything. We're going to revisit the Charter, we're going to revisit the documentation on the POA, we're going to revisit the document on the climate justice movement, and it's going to be revised based on what you've given to us here at this conference. So expect a draft 2 of the Charter, for instance, coming through before we close in December. It's been an exhausting year for particularly the anchors of COPAC, but we are hoping that that can be done together with other documentation. But in terms of the Charter, we are also fully on board in terms of the translation issue and a whole set of other questions that have been raised. And there have been some creative ideas here around podcasts in different languages, around the hard copy, and so on. So a lot of those things are also going to be what we work with going forward. There is the challenge, of course, of making the document live. So it is, again, not just formal piece of paper, but it goes to the ground after this conference. So yes, Something will come in early December, the second iteration of this charter. But please give it legs, feet, and a heart. Take it into your communities, take it into your organizations, have debates, have discussions, and we await your feedback. And we are hoping that by 1st May, we have all of this feedback that has come through, and then we revise for the final time, and we have a final charter. Now, there was a point made about giving it life so that it is constantly living as a document. That's a very important point, and it's something I think we need to grapple with. But we must keep in mind that the Freedom Charter still haunts South Africa, and it will always haunt South Africa unless it is replaced by a transformative project that picks up on the tasks that have been unfinished. The Charter haunts us, the Freedom Charter haunts us because it was abandoned. It wasn't implemented. It's a fact. And we would have a very different society, a much better society than the one we have if it was implemented. And therefore, I think that even for us as climate justice activists, this is a crucial lesson in terms of charter politics. If we are going to do a charter politics to, if you like, give cohesion and coherence to things on the grassroots, at other levels that we engage on, then it's not a Bible, but it is definitely something that has to guide what we do and how we do it. It is about a politics that we live. I think the breakthroughs on the program of action have been really, really important. Clearly, there are gaps on the ground, and as we've said consistently, we are a catalytic force as COPAC. That's how we've done our work for 20 years as a radical grassroots NGO. We are not the movement. But what we will be doing, as we said when we presented the POA proposal, hopefully we'll be leveraging some resources, but the idea is to channel those resources for local assemblies. And many of you have volunteered now, and we've captured that to convene those assemblies around the Charter, around climate science, around climate politics in local communities, and connecting with living issues, service delivery, water crisis, etc., etc. So again, this is not about substituting for you, but where we can enable with resources for you to lead, we're hoping in this moment that happens. We also basically think that there are a few more details that have to be pinned down around the POA for next year. And for that, the activist school is very, very important. One of the breakthroughs we made, particularly in our group, the Red Group, was that the children must give the signal for the convening of the People's Climate Justice Assembly in October. And that's a very, very important issue. It is symbolic, it is politically inspirational, and so on. But again, we've got to work out all of those details in the activist school next year. We've got to look at the nuts and bolts of how a lot of things are going to work. We also have to really think more sharply about our tactics. And there have been some very important contributions made around this, okay? Civil disobedience or obedience, and how do we practice this, etc. So that first activist school is going to add more flesh to the POA. It's going to bring in more research for all of us to digest. It is also going to develop a resource that will travel with the second draft of the Charter. So how it should be facilitated, and this has come from you, maybe explaining some of the concepts, some of the language, etc. So that it is understandable, and so on and so on. And we will also, in the activist school, again, as I said, pin down coordination issues. So a lot's going to come together next year. Now again, resources will determine how we bring that together. But what we believe has happened here, and particularly when seeing comrades sit down from the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, is that we've had a catalytic impact. So, if you like, taking the POA forward, but also movement building forward, has begun as an organic process. And it hasn't begun here, but it has begun at the grassroots, and is continuing here and beyond. We also feel that what we've tabled here around the Parliament engagement has sparked a nice debate. And let's keep that debate going. in the course of next year, let's take it to the activist school, and so on. Do we use the Parliament moment to also force the hand of Parliament through our courts? Do we use people's power to push Parliament, etc.? Those are interesting questions. We don't want to distract from the message. We want to be able to come across at that moment as a set of forces that understand the seriousness of this question. We are militant, but we also want society to hear us. And the media in this country will spotlight the sensation. So these are the debates, the nuances of what we're going to do, that we're going to have to work out its implications, its consequences, and so on. But the document we've tabled on a POA, comrades, is really a document that speaks to a particular moment. And so we are hoping that in the course of next year, we make that breakthrough. We earn our stripes as an emergent climate justice movement. As I've been saying to other activists here, we need people to be talking about the climate justice movement in buses, in trains, in combis, in households, and in communities. That's when we've arrived. We are not there yet. And that does mean that we have to take up the audacious commitments we've made to gridlock carbon. We've got to step up in society, and we've got to step in front, but we've got to do that in a very politically conscious way. In a way that is thoughtful, in a way that is disciplined, in a way that is ethical, and so on. And I think we have the makings of all of that. Now, on the question of the climate justice movement, I mean, what we've had in mind is that when we go to Parliament in October next year, we also use the Assembly to launch the South African Climate Justice Movement, network, whatever you want to call it, okay? But that's one critical moment. So if we get our act together, we start building from below, we're networking, we build the momentum, we engage in the actions that we are committed to, both local and national moments of convergence, we could launch the South African Climate Justice Movement in October of next year. But at the same time, I think what's striking in the conversation is that we built a consensus here, that it has to be bottom-up, which is very, very important. It has to be grounded in principles, and it clearly has to be built in struggle. So this is not an abstract thing, the idea of a movement. It's got to be living where you struggle, where you work, where you live, where you pray, and so on and so on. And that's very, very important. But I do think that we are also tabling a perspective that will evolve in the context of struggle. So for now, I think we're in a phase where we've got to knit things together. We've got to unify, we've got to find the convergences and so on. And we've got to find a modus operandi to make that happen so that it doesn't take away from grassroots agency. But as we go maybe beyond this in the next year or two, we might have to revisit the perspective of movement building. We will have to be sensitized to how things are evolving and developing, the new conditions under which we are building, and so on. And that might mean that we will have to evolve a different kind of perspective in a year or two, after praxis, after activism, after struggle. So I think again we must be open-minded as we set a framework. It's a useful framework, it's an important framework. It will give us modalities, it will give us things that will help us work together. So just to answer one of the questions posed, I think, just to have a rotating convenership, one way to resolve that question is to get organizations to volunteer, and volunteer before all of us in an assembly and tell us, listen, this is what we can bring to convening. We are offering A, B, C, D. Now we've done that to some extent in other spaces. So that's one way of thinking about it, okay? So you're not forcing somebody, you're not going into a voting competition, no, now you're number one, now you must convene us. No. If organizations have strengths, if they have capacities, they have something to offer, we must create the space for that. We must enable that and so on in how we think about the coming together. That's very, very important. I think the point about induction is a very, very important point. I mean, we were talking about getting organizations to adopt the charter, particularly the final version, get endorsees, build up that list of individuals, of organizations. We take that to Parliament, and hopefully we'll have hundreds and thousands of individuals and organizations endorsing this charter. And that also then becomes a basis for us to work with other organizations, so you share something in common. But that would mean, of course, as some have suggested, an induction program. So these are interesting nuts and bolts that we will work out as we go, but we will revise some of these things into the document. And then finally, I just want to say that we owe a very, very big thanks to our co-funders for this conference, Frederick Ebert Stifton, who has journeyed with us over the past few years in our food sovereignty campaigning, including around the dialogues, but also in this case for this conference, the Emancipatory Future Studies project, which I lead at Wits University. I want to give a special thanks to the COPAC team, particularly Jane, Courtney, and all the other students and other people and volunteers that stepped up to make this conference happen. Let's give them a round of applause. And then, of course, finally, comrades, a very big thank you to all of you. You made the time, you understood the imperative of the moment, you got here, and you've made invaluable contributions. Contributions that are making history, that are going to shape the future of this country. Amandla!
Hi everyone, I'm going to be quick because there's a bunch of you leaving now. Just to say I'm sorry that I couldn't